You can't quite call it a fall until you've lost it all. Why look until tomorrow, though you keep on counting the cards, you still won't call them all. You push your cards aside, look at your face in the mirror, see the scene's getting clearer, that you'll never stop running. Why don't you stop running to the place deep inside? Won't you try to go hide, cause it won't be there, it won't be there, because you just don't care, no reasons there, that you'll never stop running. Why don't you stop running? It's all too clear, I'll disappear, you stand alone, you're on your own.
You know, we're in the early 80s, and we were working with vets, we were doing programs with vets, and what we noticed with one of our programs, that there seemed to be an inordinate amount of guys that were coming in that telling us they were homeless. It didn't make any sense, but it seemed like every third guy almost was saying, you know, I don't have a place. They fill out a form and they had no residence. And so we started to look at that, and we said, well, wait a minute, there's something wrong here.
I don't know anybody that in the third grade when you went to school and they said, tell me what you want to be when you grow up. I don't think anyone ever said, I want to be a homeless street person. I couldn't believe how many families are one paycheck away from becoming homeless. One paycheck away, or one partner leaving away from not being able to afford what it costs for you to live and basic food. When they lose that, it's really hard to get re-caught up, because if you don't have a place to live, you're not going to keep that job going very much longer.
People don't understand the homeless on the street. They think they're all have mental problems. A lot of them are families out there that have lost their jobs because of the economy here, can't afford a home. They're living in their car and they're going to work and they're barely able to feed their children. I think people have to be more aware of the fact that these veterans out there aren't getting what they need from the government. And if they are, then they are not giving them the psychiatric help that they need, because it's just getting worse all the time.
It's a tough road for these families. They have gone through so much. I am so impressed by all of them. I'm so impressed by the service members, of course, who serve, because they have fought courageously in this battle. But our nation has not been at war through this. We have not had the kind of mobilization, the kind of momentum that's really required for this kind of so-called long war. And yet our families have sacrificed and have suffered, and we have got to be there for them as they return. Otherwise, we are going to have so many homeless families.
There are many social problems that we have in our society that, you know, there's not the will or really the majority to deal with. Homelessness is one. People don't want to look at the homeless, but they will look or think about or maybe support dealing with homeless veterans. They somehow make a distinction there.
The latest statistic I heard was 200,000, and I think that that's a very modest statistic. I think it's a lot more than that. For one thing, it's really hard to count people who are homeless, whether they're vets or non-vets, to follow them around and to find out where they're living or if they're homeless or not. I think it's very, very difficult.
In San Diego, there are probably about 4,000 homeless veterans. Now, the numbers conflict. Some people say there's 2,000. I know that we average about 800 at Stand Down, and that's only about a quarter or less than a quarter of the veterans in the community that are homeless.
The major percentage of veterans that we're treating are Vietnam era and Persian Gulf era. Those two eras combined make up the greatest or the largest number of homeless veterans.
Close to 40% of the homeless out there are veterans. I'm not sure what percent of that is combat veterans, but that is getting higher all the time. With the influx of veterans coming back from the current conflicts, we expect those numbers to rise.
One of the things that we've really noticed out here are how many vets are on the streets, and the number of people and men especially who have suffered, and there are men without limbs who are forgotten about. We went to the winter shelter and we handed out our winter survival backpacks. We were just all really moved with how little respect our veterans have been treated. There's a lot of them out here on the streets. I understand it's like 40–50%, and we really have thrown these people away. We promised them this is the way to success and to dignity and recognition, and for their courage and for their service, we've just thrown them away and left them behind. So it's really sad. There are guys who must be 80 years old, out here. I mean, it's amazing. They are seriously elderly who have been displaced by wars of long ago. They're also vets from the Iraq War. So there's a whole new generation of homeless veterans in this city as well.
Many of the homeless, obviously, on the street are mentally ill. And when we emptied out the mental hospitals, that created a big, obviously, increase in homeless. And you don't have to be on the street very long before you will have mental illness. I mean, the survival of being on the street, it creates enormous is a trauma in itself. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when we have to deal with these people, we say, well, they're crazy. Yeah, but we made them crazy, so we better. But it leads to more craziness. So we see it happening even with our current veterans. And if we don't deal with it right now, it's going to be a major issue in the future.
I was homeless for about 6 months. It's very hard. It's degrading. It was tough, but when you're in that situation, it's a survival.
It's a miserable life. You don't know where your next meal's coming from. You get beat up. You end up in jail. I mean, people are always harassing you. Fortunately enough, I try to find some place to live when I'm not here. With the money that I do get, I try to rent a room out or stay with a friend and maybe rent out a room off them or whatever. I've had my point where I've stayed in the streets for a while. It's not a lot of fun. It's scary, and I'll be 56 years old.
I was actually sitting on milk crates, behind a restaurant where I was washing dishes under the table, just to earn a little cash. It's a desperate situation because you don't know where to go. You don't want to beg from friends. You don't want to panhandle. As far as I knew, there was no food, and you see people with signs saying homeless and hungry. So my mindset was, wow, I'm going to starve out here. If I hadn't been doing part-time work at the restaurant, I may have starved. I don't know.
When I got out of the Navy, I went to college for a while, went into the Air Force. My wife and I both went in the Air Force. I ended up becoming a single parent and did that for a long time. The Air Force was very good to me as far as that went. And then when I got out, my son went to go live with his mom, and I started drinking really heavy. I'd been a drinker all along, but when I didn't have any more responsibilities, my drinking took off. I didn't have any obligations, so I just started doing a lot of crazy different stuff and just ended up me becoming homeless. I had PTSD. I just was acting out of my pain, basically. Drinking and running is what I was doing.
I wouldn't want anybody else to go through it. It's no fun. And there's a lot of women and kids on the street like that, and it's sad. For a country that's this rich, they're always giving money away, and we're homeless. It's sad. I think it's really sad. And I've worked a lot of years, and I get a little disability check, and now I tried for my Social Security, and they told me I'm not qualified to make too much money. I don't make very much money at all. By the time you pet an apartment there's nothing left. Even though I have a disability of 80%, I have to wait until I'm 65 to actually join my, draw my Social Security. So it's not only this we're fighting a lot of things, just stay alive.
Every time I go downtown, I see guys, and sometimes I'll stop and talk to them. There's a lot of them that need help. Some of them know that the help's available, but they're so beat up inside that they won't seek it, and that's a really sad thing. I wish there was a way that we had a better outreach program to go out to these men and women and bring them into the fold. Unfortunately, a lot of them are out there dying. You get up in my age group, I'm 55, and some of these guys are a lot older than I am. And it's not just Vietnam vets, it's Korean vets. I've met a lot of the kids coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. Those kids are going through a lot of problems too. Thank God there's a lot more help for them now than there was for us. And society in general is being a lot kinder to them than they were to us.
You've just been homeless for so long, and it's just like you're going against pressure, and pressure's keeping you in the same situation, So once you've been in one place, it's hard to get moving again. It's just like it's so little, I believe, outreach nowadays. So few social workers come out to where you're at and talk to you on your level that I just think that's a big problem.
We see veterans who are coming in and who are ready and willing to accept any help that's available to them. We have others who are very guarded. And those veterans tend to have more persistent and severe mental illness than others who are more open to accepting help. It depends on the veteran. It depends on what's happening with them internally, if they're having increased symptoms from a mental illness or if they're under the influence. We work to build a trust and build a relationship and motivate them to get engaged.
It has to be personal. I just talked to the people from Ohio at the National Convention for the American Legion, and they told me they had no one coming to them for help. They will not come to you for help. They're too proud. I said, you have to go to the hospital. You have to connect with these people. They have to know that you care. You have to beg them to tell them, I'm here for you.
It's a sense of failure. You know, it's, what have I done to get here? You know, I was a senior database analyst. I was a senior systems developer. Now I'm homeless sleeping on milk crates without a clue as to what tomorrow's going to bring. It's a pretty bad feeling. It's a really bad feeling. And if you're prone to depression, it could probably kill you.
I've never shot an enemy in the back. And I've never shot at an enemy until he shot first. I always gave my enemy the benefit of the doubt. It almost cost me my life.
I just think that if you fought for your country and you did things for your country, that your country should help you. I've been on the streets for 13 months. I talk to my wife every day, and I love my wife very much. But there's been a lot of hurt both ways, and I don't know if we're going to get back together, but we'll always be friends. I promised her, and I love her, and I need to pick myself up and get off the streets.
If we have unlimited funds to finance war, well, why not take care of the veterans since they served and come back home? We served honorably. We did our duty. Now why such a slight treatment like this? Why?
These are veterans of the United States of America. Insensitive and ludicrous and just tragic that we would have our veterans laying out there.
Well, I was homeless in 2005 here myself. These veterans don't want any regimentation any longer. It's really a sad situation. Most of it's PTSD, which the services are just now really starting to focus on. Al Pavich has done a hell of a job with VVSD, and I give him a high five on that one.
It's been a pleasure for me to work with Veterans Villages of San Diego, and we have been able to seek some funding for them. It's small compared to their needs, but it's been a great pleasure for me to be able to do that because they're providing a tremendous, tremendous service to our vets here in San Diego because it's kind of one-stop help. Once they are able to be part of Veterans Villages, they get economic counseling, they get psychological, social counseling, what they need to be able to get back on their feet. Those kinds of programs are really pretty rare that combine everything. We're fortunate here in San Diego, I think, to have that. But picture a man or woman who return somewhere in the country where they don't have those services. And for them to be able to get their lives back in order, get back to work, back to their families, it is a difficult, difficult transition. We're trying to do some things, but I don't believe we're doing enough. We're doing some things. And believe me, if it weren't for the Democrats pushing harder for more and more services for our vets today, we would be short millions and millions of dollars. We did not see that kind of funding in the president's budget. We have enhanced that funding because we know how really critical it is.
Say you got 30 million veterans in America. 10% of all the veterans that live in the United States live in California. And 10% of all the veterans that live in California live in San Diego County. When you take homelessness as a population, 30% of the homeless are veterans. And so we at VVSD and the San Diego veteran community are focused in on that 30%.
I'd like to close the village because it wasn't needed. But we are preparing for an onslaught from this combat. The combat is just too severe. The combat is just too constant. that divorces will occur and being laid off and being wounded and not being able to come back to society very well will lead to me having to see a lot more of them. We're making every room big enough for wheelchairs, every bathroom big enough for the handicapped, because so many of these combat woundeds are coming back with major casualties, physical casualties, so we have to prepare for that, sadly.
As far as VVSD goes, if they go through our program and complete the program and graduate, we have about an 80% success rate that they will, and a success rate for us means a year afterwards, not just they finished. It means that they are no longer homeless, they've improved their job opportunities, they've had no crime, they've had no substance abuse issues in that year, and so we have a very high success rate if they complete our program. There's a group that'll come in and go because they're not quite ready to change. So that success is when they finally finish and go through. The only group that I'm concerned about nowadays are our young folks coming home. We have a few in our program, but they're becoming homeless, and that shouldn't be. We have the resources, we have the programs, but we haven't grabbed them, we haven't pulled them in yet, a lot of them, to get help. By the time they get to us, they are seriously homeless. It's not just, I'm out of work. By the time they get to us, then the substance abuse issues play a part, and combat stress and PTSD plays a part by the time they get to us. I don't know about the rest of the world, but I know here in San Diego we have excellent resources. We just need to get the people to the resources. It is so incredibly easy to become homeless and very, very difficult to change it. So for someone to come into, especially to an institution, and say, I need help, especially someone who's a homeless veteran, is very frightening because they don't know what to expect. They've had some bad experiences, especially our combat veterans. The combat veterans are not going to initially trust a system.
Currently we have beds for 128 residents, but before summer of next year, we should be up and running 224 beds. There's a lot of homeless veterans out there on the streets, and there's not enough beds, so we're trying to help out as best as we can.
I want to be a productive part of society, and this is a place that offers that. You know, that lets guys like me and you know, to get a second chance.
I got out of the Army in '94 because in '93 I broke my back. So that made it pretty hard for me to upkeep a job. And things got pretty, not bad until recently. And it was due to drugs, and I had no clue where to go. So when I went up to the hospital, they told me about this place. So I was able to ask this place to give me a home. We have post-traumatic stress available to women, not just on sexual problems in the military, but actual combat experience, and that was part of my problem. You need somebody to talk to. This is the place to go. There is no place for women, I don't think. Not at least I haven't seen. And I don't always need to talk about a sexual problem. It's, you know, I have a flashback, things like that. These guys are great here. And that needs to get out because nobody knows about this place. They hear about it, it's gotta be guys. No, this is an awesome place.
Usually it takes a while when a veteran comes back from conflict. It's a cycle. It takes a while for them to end up on the street and then come to us. So I would expect within the next couple of years we're going to see a large number. Originally I came through here myself as a resident back in 1995. I wasn't quite homeless yet, but I was pretty close to it, and I had an alcohol problem and my life was pretty messed up. So I came here and got my life back on track over the years and went to school, and many of our veterans here do the same thing. They come here and they get focused, and a lot of them go off to school or off to other kind of employment trainings. And I went off to school and ended up getting certified here in the state of California as a drug and alcohol counselor, and came and got me a job. And over the years I've worked hard, and now I'm program director.
I've been running from something I don't know. And every friend I ever had, they turned to foe. And these holes are worn deep inside my soul. I never ever gave my heart a chance to grow. It's been stomped upon, left out in the cold.
When post-traumatic stress does occur, you're looking at someone who that experience is just sticking with them. It's essentially having one foot stuck in the past, if not both. A lot of the veterans coming back, there's a short fuse, which is natural for anyone. You look at yourself being jet lagged, there's a natural readjustment cycle we go through. When you're looking at PTSD, though, it's lingering a little longer than it should.
My generation of combat veterans, the Vietnam veterans, post-traumatic stress didn't exist. It was a weakness and a terrible thing, and what's wrong with you, and it must have been the drugs. I saw more drugs back here in California than I ever saw in Vietnam, but they were the whacked out, baby-killing combat veterans. PTSD wasn't understood. It is now, which is phenomenally wonderful. Now we know that if somebody's been in trauma or intense stress for that period of time, they will have that cut. What we saw with the Vietnam vets is nobody treated the cut. Nobody cleaned it. Nobody put a Band-Aid over it. Nobody watched it. Nobody let it heal. They didn't do anything with it. We didn't do anything with it because we didn't know what to do except for try to ignore it. And when you ignore a cut, it gets infected. And after a while of infection, it starts oozing and it looks pretty bad. And then it's really going to be scary to turn it over to a nurse so she can scrub it. So we don't do it. And yeah, 17 years later, you're gangrene and it could kill you and it looks real ugly. So sometimes our new combat veterans don't want to be considered way out there, and they won't be considered way out there because they won't have to wait 17 years to have someone begin to clean the wound and begin to heal that wound. And then that just becomes a scar someday that you don't think about much. It's not endangering your life anymore.
A lot of attitudes toward illness in our society, especially mental illness, are not very progressive. People still do not think that mental illness is as important as physical illness, and the insurance companies don't fund mental issues as much as at a parity with physical. And yet, the issues about the mental illness of returning vets, whether from Vietnam or now from Iraq and Afghanistan, are very real, and people understand what's going on. And if we can get attention to the mental illness of these homecoming veterans, I think we'll have done a lot to changing attitudes in our society. What they call the signature wound of this war has been brain injury because of all the explosive devices going out. And even if you're not directly hit, you will suffer concussive force that will lead to brain injury. A mild brain injury is real, but may not be evident right away or even evident to the person having it. And it's that kind of injury of the brain that's going to cause problems later on. They will have trouble holding jobs, they will have trouble relating to people, they will be homeless. So we're creating now a whole new group of people because of the nature of this war that have great potential for being homeless, and we better, as I said, deal with it now.
I was in the first Persian Gulf War. That was in 1991. I served as a medic and a mechanic. A good friend of mine, he came into our unit to use his phone. I let him use the phone ahead of me because that was my unit. I said, well, these guys got to go back out. He got in an accident, and it was a rollover. And due to the fact I was the medic of the unit, I had to go out there on site and had to, pronounce him dead. And that took me far into it. And then once it was the pronouncing of him dead, now I got to be the mechanic to work on the truck. And that got me.
People diagnosed with PTSD can recover. We do know that about a third of people don't, based on research. Obviously, it is something better to address sooner rather than later. There are some specific therapies out there through either individual therapy or medication or a combination thereof that people can recover from PTSD. It's a shame that there is a public stigma around PTSD, but when you look at the number of World War II veterans and Vietnam veterans who have had very happy, successful lives, can absolutely recover from PTSD. Obviously, we can't take away your experiences. Your experiences are part of your life and it will always be there, but you can learn how to live with it and you can recover.
I think America just needs to understand that anybody can listen to anybody almost about anything. You don't have to really have been raped to talk to somebody about rape. You really don't have to have been in combat But so many times people would say, we really want to know, man, tell me what it was like. Tell me. So you start telling them a little tiny bit of what you were experiencing, and their eyes get big and they're closing down, and you have now opened up a little bit, and you got to grab that all back and put it away because they can't handle it. So if everybody would just learn to actively listen without trying to fix, not judge people by the horrid images they have in their brains, because then we learn not to, even more so we learn not to. So there is this divide.
We decided we were going to do a one-time, one-year program. We call it Stand Down. In other words, take people out of the field, bring them back to the base camp for resupply. We're going to do that one time and try and help some folks. What we were really looking to do was to raise the consciousness of the community about the fact that there are a lot more veterans that are on the street than people know about.
There was one really basic thing that we talked about when we started this, and that's that we had brothers and sisters outside the wire, and that we were never going to let them stay outside the wire, and it was our responsibility as warriors to make certain that those that were the wounded that were out there got the help that they needed. And the only way that we could figure out to do that was not wait for the government to figure it out, or the city to figure it out, or the county to figure it out, but to do what we always do as warriors, which is to figure it out ourselves and to make sure that we don't leave the wounded behind. Your job is to make sure you're not one of the wounded left behind, and you get healthy and strong enough to go out and get whoever the hell else is still out there back.
In combat, you never leave anybody behind, you know. You risk what you need to risk, but you go get them. And 20 years ago, there were combat veterans that wondered, do we have our fellow combat vets on the other side of the wire called homelessness? And so they had this wild idea about, let's find out. And it took a while to convince the city and the police and the fire departments and those kind of people, but they ultimately were able to plaster the city with cards and say, if you served your country and you're homeless, come to the San Diego Athletics